Hi friends, you may think you know the harrowing tale of the Black Death that engulfed Europe, starting in 1347, but have you ever wondered what it felt like through the tiny paws and whiskers of a humble rat weaving through the forgotten corners of plague-stricken lands, witnessing secrets buried in the shadows of history? Welcome to The Animal Historian. I invite you to rest, relax, and let this story carry you away. If you enjoy these journeys through history, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Share it in the comments below, and tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your ideas inspire the next adventures. My dear listeners, as you settle into the soft embrace of your blankets, let me take you back to the gentle whispers of my beginnings. I was born in the year 1345, or so I reckon, by the cycles of the moon and the changing sense of the seasons, in the bustling port city of Caffa, nestled along the rugged shores of the Crimean Peninsula. Caffa, you see, was a jewel of the Genoese merchants, a colony claimed by the Republic of Genoa, far from their Italian homeland, yet pulsing with the lifeblood of trade that connected the vast steppes of Asia to the distant markets of Europe. It was a place where the salty breath of the Black Sea mingled with the earthy aromas of spices, silks, and furs unloaded from weary caravans. I remember the warmth of my mother's nest, tucked away in the dim crevices of a wooden warehouse, lined with scraps of wool and bits of discarded grain. The air was always heavy with the scent of cinnamon and pepper, carried on the winds from distant lands like Cathay and the Mongol realms. Oh, how those smells soothed me in my earliest days. A quiet comfort amid the rhythmic creak of ships rocking in the harbor. As a young rat, small and sleek with fur as black as the midnight sea, I learned to navigate the world through my senses. My whiskers would twitch at the faintest vibration, guiding me through the labyrinth of crates and barrels stacked high in the storage houses. The ground beneath my paws was cool and gritty, dusted with flour from sacks of wheat brought by Tatar traders from the Golden Horde's vast territories. I would scamper along the stone quays, feeling the gentle mist from the waves lapping against the docks, while overhead the calls of seagulls blended with the murmurs of merchants haggling in tongues I could not understand: Italian, Greek, Tatar, and even the exotic cadences of Persian travelers. The sun would filter through the sails of galleys, casting warm, dappled patterns on the wooden planks, and I would pause to bask in that golden light, my tiny heart beating steadily, untroubled by the world above. Life in Caffa was a tapestry of quiet routines, woven with the threads of commerce that few truly appreciate in the annals of history. Not many know that Caffa was not just a port, but a thriving hub of the Silk Road's maritime extension, where goods from as far as China, porcelains delicate as eggshells, and teas with floral whispers met with European woolens and wines. Lesser-known secret of this era, drawn from the chronicles of travelers like Ibn Battuta, who passed through similar ports, is that Caffa was also a center for the slave trade, where captives from the steppes were bartered like bundles of fur. I witnessed this from the shadows, the soft clink of chains, the muffled sobs carried on the breeze, blending with the scent of sweat and despair. In my animal innocence, these were merely parts of the symphony, the low hum of human endeavors that provided endless nooks for a rat like me to explore. I would nibble on forgotten crumbs of bread, tasting the faint saltiness of the sea, and retreat to my nest as the evening bells tolled from the Genoese churches, their tones deep and resonant, lulling the city into a peaceful slumber. The nights were especially serene, wrapped in a blanket of stars that seemed to whisper secrets of distant lands. I recall the coolness of the stone walls against my side as I curled up, the distant lapping of waves, a constant, rhythmic lullaby. The air would cool, carrying the faint, earthy smell of rain from the mountains inland, where the Tatar nomads roamed with their herds of sheep and horses. Little did I know then that those very steps held a hidden peril, one that historians now trace back to the marmots and gerbils of Central Asia's Tian Shan Mountains, a lesser-known origin of the plague, revealed only in modern times through ancient DNA unearthed from burial sites. These rodents, carriers of the Yersinia pestis bacterium, lived in harmony with the fleas that would later become unwitting messengers of doom. But in my youth, such knowledge was far beyond my simple world. I knew only the comfort of abundance, the gentle rustle of leaves in the olive groves surrounding the city walls, and the occasional warmth of a flickering lantern light spilling from a tavern window. As I grew, my adventures expanded. I would venture into the marketplaces, where the ground was alive with the patter of feet, merchants in fine robes, sailors with weathered faces, and even the occasional monk from distant monasteries, their incense-scented cloaks brushing the dust. The smells were a feast for my senses, fresh-baked flatbreads with hints of sesame, the tangy zest of olives preserved in brine, and the rich, metallic tang of coins exchanged in hurried deals. One quiet afternoon, I remember hiding beneath a cart laden with furs, feeling the soft pelts brush against my back, their musky odor a reminder of the wild steppes. Not commonly known is that these furs often came from infected regions where the plague had simmered among rodent populations. For years, a silent undercurrent in the trade routes that connected empires. Contemporary accounts from Genoese notaries, preserved in archives, speak of the port's prosperity, with over 200 ships docking annually, yet they overlook the invisible passengers like me and the fleas that hitched rides on our fur. The city's fortifications, sturdy walls of stone built by the Genoese to ward off rivals, provided endless pathways for my kind. I would climb the vines that clung to them, feeling the rough texture under my claws, and gaze out over the sea, where the horizon melted into a hazy blue. The wind would carry the faint calls of dolphins, their playful splashes a distant melody. In those moments, the world felt vast, yet intimate, a place of endless possibility. I shared my domain with other creatures, cats with eyes like glowing embers, who sometimes pursued me in lazy chases, and birds nesting in the eaves, their soft coos adding to the tranquil chorus. The humans, too, moved in predictable rhythms. The dawn prayers from the mosques of the Armenian quarter, the midday bustle of unloading cargo, and the evening gatherings where stories were told in hushed tones around fires crackling with pine resin. But even in this idyll, there were subtle shifts that a keen nose like mine could detect. The air sometimes carried a faint, acrid whiff from the inland caravans, perhaps the first whispers of unrest from the Golden Horde's territories, where tensions brewed between the Mongol Khans and the Italian traders. A historical secret not widely shared is that Caffa had endured sieges before, but none like what was to come. In 1343, a minor conflict had already strained relations. Foreshadowing the greater storm, I paid it little mind, content to forage in the granaries where kernels of barley spilled like tiny treasures, their nutty flavor a simple joy, the warmth of the sun on my back, the soft patter of rain on thatched roofs during spring showers. These were the constants that defined my early existence. As the seasons turned, I matured into a nimble explorer, my body lean and agile, perfectly suited to the hidden world beneath the human one. I would slip through cracks in the city gates, venturing into the surrounding fields where wild grasses swayed like a gentle sea, their seeds a delightful treat. The earth was soft and loamy, yielding under my paws. Yet in the quiet of those fields, I sometimes sensed a distant rumble, like thunder on the horizon, though the skies were clear. Historians now know this was the approach of the Mongol armies, but to me, it was merely a vibration in the ground, a subtle change in the wind's direction. My family grew around me, siblings scampering in playful tussles, our mother teaching us the art of survival with patient nudges. We nested in the warmth of hay bales, the straw's dry, comforting scent enveloping us like a blanket. The nights grew longer as autumn approached, the chill seeping in, but we huddled together, our breaths mingling in soft, rhythmic harmony. I remember the first frost, how it crisped the leaves underfoot, their crunch a faint echo in the stillness. The harbor lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth, guiding ships home with promises of safety. Little could I foresee how this tranquility would shatter, but for now, let that thought linger like a soft mist. The peace was profound, the world a vast, whispering expanse. The night is quiet, so very quiet. As the seasons spun their quiet dance, my world in Caffa grew ever more familiar, a tapestry of scents and sounds that cradled me in comfort. The year was 1346, and the Black Sea's gentle waves lapped against the docks with a rhythm as steady as my own heartbeat. I was no longer the tiny pup of my mother's nest, but a full-grown rat, my black fur sleek and my senses sharp, attuned to the pulse of the city. The air was thick with the briny tang of the sea, mingling with the smoky warmth of roasting chestnuts from vendors' fires in the marketplace. My days were spent weaving through the chaos of human feet, darting between the wooden stalls, where traders shouted prices for amber beads and bolts of crimson silk. The cobblestones, worn smooth by countless soles, felt cool beneath my paws, and I savored the fleeting warmth of sunlight spilling through gaps in the canvas awnings above. Caffa was a city alive with contrasts, bustle and stillness, wealth and want. From my low vantage, I saw the world humans overlooked, the crumbs of rye bread scattered by hurried hands, the glint of a dropped coin half buried in the dust, the faint rustle of other rats moving in the shadows. My favorite haunt was the granary district, where towering sacks of wheat and barley exhaled their earthy sweetness. I'd nibble on stray grains, their nutty flavor bursting on my tongue, while listening to the distant clang of hammers from the blacksmiths forging anchors for the Genoese galleys. The air carried whispers of far-off places, cloves from the Moluccas, saffron from Persia, and I, a small creature in a vast web, felt connected to them all. But beneath this vibrant hum, there was a secret stirring, one few humans noticed, but which my keen nose could not ignore. The caravans arriving from the east, laden with furs and spices, brought with them an unfamiliar scent, faintly sour, like spoiled milk, left too long in the sun. It clung to the pelts stacked high in the warehouses, where I often curled up for a midday nap. Unbeknownst to the merchants, these goods carried more than trade. They harbored fleas, tiny passengers from the steppes where the plague had already begun to whisper among rodent colonies. A historical detail rarely mentioned in chronicles is that the Mongol trade routes, stretching from the Gobi Desert to the Black Sea, were not just conduits for silk and gold, but also for disease. Modern studies of ancient rodent remains found in burial pits near Lake Issyk-Kul confirm that Yersinia pestis was circulating in Central Asia by the 1330s, carried by fleas nestled in the fur of marmots and gerbils, long before it reached Caffa's shores. My days were not all foraging and exploration. There were moments of quiet connection with my kin, my siblings, now grown, and new litters born to my mother in our cozy nest. We'd huddle together in the cool evenings, our fur brushing softly, sharing warmth as the wind howled through the narrow alleys. The humans above us moved in their own rhythms, sailors singing sea shanties in low rolling tones, their voices blending with the creak of ship timbers, priests chanting vespers in the stone churches, their words floating like incense smoke. I'd listen, my ears twitching as the bells tolled, their deep resonance vibrating through the walls. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for those gentle sounds that wrapped the city in a soothing embrace. Yet, the air was changing. By late 1346, I noticed the caravans arriving less frequently, their drivers more harried, their voices tinged with unease. I overheard snippets of their talk, words like sickness and curse, as they unloaded their wares under the watchful eyes of Genoese guards. One evening, while gnawing on a rind of cheese, left near a tavern, I caught the scent of something new, fear, sharp and metallic, emanating from a group of Tatar traders huddled around a fire. They spoke of villages in the interior where entire families had fallen silent, their bodies marked with strange swellings. A lesser-known historical fact, pieced together from the letters of Genoese notaries preserved in Genoa's archives, is that rumors of a deadly illness had reached Caffa months before the siege, dismissed as superstition by the city's rulers. I, of course, understood none of this, but my instincts prickled, urging me to stay alert. My wanderings took me beyond the city walls, into the fields where wild grasses swayed under the moon's pale glow. The earth was soft and loamy, and I'd burrow beneath the roots of olive trees, their gnarled branches casting intricate shadows. The air here was cleaner, free of the city's dense odors, carrying only the faint perfume of wild thyme and the distant bleating of goats. But even here, I sensed a shift. The birds were quieter, their songs less frequent, as if they too felt the world holding its breath. I'd scamper back to the city at dawn, the dew clinging to my fur, and find solace in the familiar, the warmth of a sun-warmed stone, the soft patter of rain on wooden roofs during sudden showers, the distant laughter of children playing near the fountain. One memory stands out, vivid as the glow of a lantern. I was perched atop a barrel in the harbor, watching a ship unload its cargo under the stars. The sailors moved with weary precision, their breaths visible in the cool night air. A crate slipped, spilling bolts of linen onto the dock, and I caught a whiff of that sour scent again, stronger now, clinging to the fabric. A sailor cursed softly, his voice barely a murmur, and I wondered why the humans seemed so blind to the invisible danger I sensed. Historical records, like those of the chronicler Gabriele de Mussi, later suggested that the plague's arrival in Caffa was no accident, but a deliberate act of war, though the truth remains shrouded in debate. For me, it was simply a change in the air, a subtle warning my whiskers could not ignore. My nights grew bolder. I'd venture into the homes of merchants, slipping through cracks in mud brick walls to explore their hearths, where embers glowed like tiny suns. The scent of stewed lamb and rosemary filled the air, and I'd nibble on scraps left on clay plates, savoring the richness. The humans slept soundly, their snores a soft counterpoint to the crackle of the fire. I never understood why they gathered so many treasures, golden goblets, embroidered tapestries, when the simple warmth of a hearth was enough to soothe any soul. The streets outside were quiet, save for the occasional clop of a horse's hooves or the distant bark of a dog, and I'd return to my nest, curling up among my family, the straw soft and warm against my fur. But that peace was fragile, like a spider's web trembling in the breeze. By winter's edge, the city's rhythm faltered, the marketplace grew quieter, the traders' voices hushed. I overheard tales of a great army approaching. Janabeg, Khan of the Golden Horde, enraged by disputes over trade rights. A secret not widely known, gleaned from the annals of Mongol history, is that Janabeg's Siege of Caffa in 1346-47 was not just about power, but desperation. His own lands were already touched by the plague, weakening his forces. I felt it in the ground, a faint tremor of hooves, growing louder each day. The air grew heavy, the scent of smoke from distant fires mingling with the sea's saltiness. The humans fortified their walls, their shouts echoing through the night. But I, a small rat, could only watch and wait, my instincts whispering of a storm yet to come. As the chill of winter deepened in early 1347, the distant rumbles I had sensed grew into a thunderous reality, shaking the very foundations of Caffa. The air turned crisp and biting, carrying the sharp scent of snow from the mountains, but now laced with something heavier, the acrid smoke of countless campfires encircling the city. I huddled in my nest, my whiskers quivering at the vibrations beneath the earth, as the hooves of thousands of Mongol horses pounded the frozen ground. Janabeg's army had arrived, a vast horde from the Golden Horde, their tents sprouting like dark mushrooms across the plains. The wind whispered through the cracks in the warehouse walls, bringing with it the unfamiliar odors of horse sweat, leather saddles oiled with animal fat, and the faint, metallic tang of weapons being sharpened. From my hidden perch, I could hear the low chants of the Tatar warriors, their voices rising and falling like a distant storm, blending with the occasional whinny of a steed. The siege had begun, a slow tightening of the noose around Caffa's sturdy walls. The Genoese, ever resilient, barred the gates and manned the battlements with crossbowmen, their shouts echoing softly in the cold air. I scampered along the shadows of the fortifications, feeling the rough stone under my paws, cool and unyielding. The city, once a hive of trade, now pulsed with a quiet tension. The marketplaces, half empty, the harbors silent, save for the gentle slap of waves against empty docks. No ships dared approach, blockaded by the Mongol fleet's distant silhouettes on the horizon. The air inside the walls grew stale, heavy with the scent of stored provisions. Salted fish with its briny sharpness, barrels of wine exhaling a faint, fermented sweetness. I nibbled on a forgotten apple core, its tart juice a small comfort amid the growing unease. From my vantage in the granaries, I witnessed the humans' preparations, the soft clink of armor being donned, the rhythmic grinding of millstones turning grain into flour for siege rations. The bells in the churches tolled more frequently now, their deep, resonant peals calling the faithful to prayer, a soothing cadence that masked the underlying fear. The nights were longer, wrapped in a blanket of frost that glittered under the moon, and I curled tighter with my kin, our breaths mingling in warm puffs. Yet, even in this enclosure, life persisted in gentle rhythms. A child's laughter echoing faintly from a courtyard, the crackle of a hearth fire warming a family's meal, the distant coo of pigeons nesting in the towers. But outside, the world was transforming. The Mongol camp sprawled endlessly, a sea of yurts and banners fluttering in the wind, their colors muted by the winter haze. I ventured close once, slipping through a drainage culvert beneath the walls, driven by curiosity and the lure of new scents. The ground beyond was trampled into mud, frozen hard, and the air thick with the earthy musk of unwashed bodies and cooking fires, where mutton simmered in iron pots, horses stamped restlessly, their warm breath steaming in the cold, and I darted between their legs, my heart pattering softly. The warriors moved with purposeful grace, their bows strung and arrows fletched with feathers that rustled like dry leaves. A lesser-known historical secret, drawn from the sparse records of Mongol chroniclers preserved in Persian manuscripts, is that Janabeg's forces were not at full strength. Internal strife within the Golden Horde had weakened them, with rival khans vying for power, a detail often overshadowed by the siege's dramatic outcome. As days blurred into weeks, the first assaults came, ladders propped against the walls, the thud of battering rams echoing like muffled thunder. I felt the vibrations through the stone, a steady rhythm that set my fur on edge. Arrows whistled overhead, their shafts embedding in wooden roofs with soft thunks, and the cries of the wounded filtered down like distant echoes. Yet, from my low perspective, these were mere interruptions to my foraging. I scavenged in the abandoned outskirts, finding scraps of bread hardened by frost, their crusty texture a familiar solace. The air carried a new note now, blood, coppery and sharp, mingling with the sulphurous whiff of gunpowder from the Genoese cannons, an early use of such weapons in sieges. Though rudimentary and unreliable, the cold deepened, snow blanketing the land in a soft, white hush. I remember burrowing into a pile of discarded wool near the walls, the fibers warm and itchy against my skin as flurries danced in the wind. The humans inside rationed their fires, the smoke rising in thin, wavering columns, scenting the air with pine resin. Whispers spread among them, tales of the enemy's vast numbers. But I sensed something else, a faint, sickly sweetness wafting from the Mongol camp, like overripe fruit left to rot. It was subtle at first, masked by the winter's bite, but my nose, ever keen, detected it growing stronger. Unbeknownst to many, the plague had already taken root among the besiegers, carried from the steppes where it had festered for years. A historical detail rarely highlighted from recent genomic studies of ancient DNA published in scientific journals like Nature is that the Black Death's strain originated around Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan as early as 1338, evidenced by tombstone inscriptions mentioning a pestilence that claimed lives in Nestorian Christian communities, a quiet precursor far from Europe's gaze. Inside Caffa, the siege wore on with a monotonous calm. The markets adapted, bartering in hushed tones for what little remained. Dried figs, with their sticky sweetness, olives preserved in oil that left a glossy sheen on my paws. I watched from the rafters as merchants huddled by braziers, their breaths visible, discussing the blockade's toll. The sea, once a lifeline, now mocked us with its empty expanse, waves murmuring against the quays. Nights brought a profound stillness, broken only by the occasional sentry's call or the soft rustle of wind through bare branches. The night was quiet, so very quiet, a velvet shroud over the besieged city. But the sickness in the camp escalated. I overheard the Genoese guards murmuring about bodies piling up beyond the walls, their voices low and fearful. The scent grew overpowering, a cloying decay that seeped through the air, carried on the breeze. One moonlit night, I crept closer again, my paws crunching softly on the frosted grass. The Mongol fires burned lower, casting flickering shadows on pale faces marked by fever. Warriors groaned softly, their bodies swollen with dark buboes, a sight that stirred an instinctual dread in me. Fleas, those tiny companions I scarcely noticed, hopped restlessly in the camp's filth, unwitting bearers of the doom. Then came the catapults. The air hummed with the creak of wooden arms being winched back, followed by the whoosh of projectiles arcing over the walls. But these were no ordinary stones. They were the plague-ridden corpses of the fallen hurled into the city with grim intent. The thuds of impact echoed dully, and the stench exploded. Rotting flesh, putrid and overwhelming, spreading like a fog. A contentious historical secret, debated in scholarly works based on Gabriele de Musi's 1348 account, though he was not an eyewitness and wrote from Piacenza, is whether this was deliberate biological warfare or a desperate tactic to dispose of bodies and demoralize the defenders. Modern historians, citing sources like the Russian annals, suggest it may have been exaggerated, but the act undeniably accelerated the plague's infiltration as rodents like me unwittingly became vectors. Panic stirred within Caffa, subtle at first. Humans covered their noses with cloths scented with vinegar. Their movements hurried, yet hushed. I retreated to safer shadows, but the air inside now carried that same sickly taint. The churches filled with soft chants, candles flickering like stars in the gloom, their wax melting in slow drips. I nibbled on consecrated bread, left on altars, its plain flavor a grounding comfort. The siege dragged on, the cold unrelenting, but the true enemy was invisible, creeping through fur and fabric alike. As spring's first hints thawed the ground, the mud turning soft underfoot, I sensed the breaking point approaching. The Mongol army, ravaged by the disease, began to falter, their assaults weakening. The damage was done. The plague had breached the walls, a silent invader. With the thaw of spring in 1347, the Siege of Caffa began to unravel, much like the fragile ice cracking on the Black Sea's shores. The air softened, carrying the faint green scent of budding grasses from the fields beyond the walls. But it was tainted now, heavy with the rot that had been hurled into our midst. The Mongol army, decimated by the very sickness they had unleashed, withdrew in ragged lines, their horses' hooves churning the mud into a soft slurry that squelched underfoot. I felt the ground's vibrations ease, the distant drums of their retreat fading into a hushed murmur. Janibeg's forces melted away like shadows at dawn, leaving behind a landscape scarred by abandoned tents and smoldering fires, their embers glowing faintly in the misty mornings. The wind shifted, bringing a cleaner breath from the sea, but the damage lingered, an invisible shroud settling over the city. Inside the walls, Caffa stirred with a tentative relief. The gates creaked open after months of closure, their iron hinges groaning like weary sighs, and the first scouts ventured out, their boots crunching on the frost-kissed earth. I scampered along the ramparts, my paws light on the warming stone, inhaling the mix of salt air and charred wood from the siege engines left behind. The humans cheered softly, their voices hoarse from rationing, as supplies trickled in from nearby villages, fresh loaves of bread with crusts that cracked gently, wheels of cheese exuding a mild, creamy aroma. Yet beneath this resurgence, a new shadow crept. The plague, that silent wanderer, had taken root within the city, carried on the fleas that hopped from corpse to living host, from fur to fabric. My senses, ever attuned, detected the change first. The air in the warehouses grew thick with a feverish heat, not from the sun but from the bodies beginning to falter. I remember nesting in a bale of hay near the harbor, the straw soft and golden, when I caught the scent, sour and metallic, like blood mixed with sweat, wafting from a nearby sailor's quarters. He groaned in his sleep, his skin marked by dark swellings under his arms, buboes pulsing like hidden hearts. The humans called it the pestilence, their whispers laced with fear. But to me, it was a shift in the world's rhythm, a discordant note in the symphony of sense, a historical secret seldom explored in popular tales, revealed through the analysis of Caffa's notarial records, archived in Genoa, is that the city's consuls imposed early quarantines, isolating the sick in makeshift lazarettos outside the walls, a precursor to later European measures. Though ineffective against the flea-borne spread, as the days lengthened, the outbreak bloomed quietly at first. I wandered the streets, now emptier, the cobblestones warming under the sun's gentle caress. The marketplaces reopened tentatively, stalls laden with herbs like rosemary and thyme, their pungent leaves crushed underfoot, releasing bursts of fragrance that masked the underlying decay. Merchants haggled in subdued tones, their eyes darting nervously, while priests processed through the alleys, swinging censers that trailed clouds of frankincense, its resinous smoke curling lazily into the air. I nibbled on a discarded sprig of mint, its cool bite a fleeting refreshment, as I watched families huddle in doorways, their faces pale and drawn. The bells tolled, not for prayer now, but for the dead, their peals slow and mournful, echoing off the stone facades like a lullaby turned somber. Nights brought a deeper stillness, the city wrapped in a velvet darkness punctured by lantern lights flickering in windows. I curled in my nest, the warmth of my kin a soft barrier against the chill seeping from the walls. But sleep came fitfully. The groans of the afflicted filtered through the air, muffled and distant, blending with the lap of waves against the docks. One evening, I ventured into a physician's home. Slipping through a crack in the wooden shutter, the room was dimly lit by a single candle, its flame dancing gently, casting shadows on shelves lined with glass vials of colored liquids, vinegar for cleansing, rose water for soothing. The doctor, masked with a cloth scented with camphor, tended it to a patient, lancing a bubo with a steady hand, the pus releasing a sharp, foul odor that made my whiskers twitch. Little known is that these early treatments drew from Arabic medical texts, like those of Ibn Sina, translated and circulated in Genoa circles, advocating bloodletting and herbal poultices, methods that offered comfort but no cure, as the true bacterial culprit remained unseen. The plague's grip tightened, spreading through the quarters like ink in water. I saw it in the Armenian district, where incense burned continuously in the churches, its spicy haze mingling with the scent of beeswax candles. Bodies were carried out on biers draped in simple cloths, the bearers' steps heavy and measured, their breaths ragged behind vinegar-soaked rags. The ground in the cemeteries softened with fresh earth, turned over in quiet haste, the scent of damp soil a grounding earthiness amid the chaos. Yet life persisted in small ways. A cat nursing her kittens in a sunlit corner, their soft mews a gentle counterpoint, birds returning to nest in the eaves, their wings rustling like pages in a forgotten book. By midsummer, the harbor stirred with urgency. The Genoese galleys, idle for so long, were provisioned anew, their decks scrubbed with seawater that left a salty crust under my paws. I boarded one such ship unwittingly, drawn by the allure of fresh grain sacks stacked in the hold, their contents spilling kernels that crunched satisfyingly. The air below deck was cool and musty, redolent of tar and rope, with the faint tang of bilge water sloshing rhythmically. The sailors, some bearing the marks of recent illness, pale scars from healed buboes, moved with hurried purpose, their voices low as they cast off lines. A fleet of 12 ships set sail in late summer 1347, fleeing the stricken city for the safety of home ports in Italy. Unaware they carried the plague in their midst. As the ship pulled away, I perched on a coil of rope, feeling the gentle rock of the waves, the wind carrying the receding scent of Caffa's smoke and stone. The sea stretched endlessly, a vast, undulating blanket under the sun's warm gaze, dotted with the white caps of distant waves. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a soft melody, and I savored the spray misting my fur, cool and invigorating. The humans spoke of Messina in Sicily as their first stop, a bustling port under the kingdom of Sicily's rule, where they hoped to find respite. Little did they know, as chronicled in the later accounts of Michele da Piazza, a Franciscan friar who witnessed the arrival, that their ships would dock in October 1347, unleashing the pestilence upon an unsuspecting island, a pivotal moment that marked Europe's descent into the Black Death, with the rats and fleas aboard serving as unwitting heralds. Life aboard was a new rhythm, the creak of timbers, a constant lullaby, the flap of sails like whispered secrets. I explored the hold, weaving through crates of spices, cinnamon sticks, with their warm, woody aroma, peppercorns popping under my teeth. The crew's meals provided scraps, hard biscuits softened by seawater, their salty chew a simple pleasure. Nights on the open sea were profound, the stars a glittering canopy, the moon's light silvering the waves. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the gentle hush of the ocean's breath. But as we neared Sicily, a familiar unease stirred. One sailor fell ill mid-voyage, his coughs echoing in the confined space, the scent of fever returning like an old shadow. The others isolated him below, but the fleas roamed freely, hopping in the dim light. A historical detail often overlooked from ship manifests preserved in Sicilian archives is that these Genoese vessels carried not just merchants but refugees, including Jewish families fleeing pogroms in the Crimea, adding layers to the human tapestry of transmission, as prejudice would later blame them unjustly in Europe. The coastline of Messina appeared on the horizon, its cliffs rising softly in the dawn mist, promising land's embrace. Yet I sensed the storm within, the plague coiled and ready. As the galley glided into the harbor of Messina in October 1347, the sun hung low over the Strait of Sicily, casting a golden sheen on the water that rippled like silk under a gentle breeze. I felt the ship's timbers creak softly as we docked, the ropes groaning as they were secured to the weathered piers. The air was warmer here than in Caffa, laced with the tangy scent of citrus groves from the nearby hills and the earthy aroma of olive trees swaying in the wind. Messina, a thriving port under the kingdom of Aragon's distant rule, bustled with life. Fishermen hauling nets heavy with silver-scaled sardines, merchants unloading amphorae of wine that exhaled a faint, fruity sweetness. From my hiding spot in the hold, amid sacks of grain that still carried the dusty whisper of Crimean fields, I scampered up a coil of rope, my paws gripping the rough fibers to glimpse this new world. The docks were alive with the patter of feet on wooden planks, the distant clang of bells from the cathedral, their tones deep and resonant, calling the faithful to vespers. The humans on board, weary from the voyage, descended the gangplank with hesitant steps, their faces pale and drawn. Some coughed softly, their breaths ragged, and I caught that familiar, sour taint in the air, the fever's mark, clinging to their clothes like an unseen mist. The Messinese port officials, clad in simple tunics, approached warily, their voices murmuring in Sicilian dialect, a melodic lilt that blended Italian and Arabic influences from the island's layered history. They inspected the cargo, bolts of silk shimmering in the light, spices in burlap sacks releasing bursts of cinnamon and clove, but their eyes widened at the sight of the ill sailors, bodies swollen with dark buboes, a lesser-known historical secret chronicled by the Franciscan friar Michel da Piazza in his Historia Secula, preserved in medieval manuscripts and rarely discussed beyond scholarly circles, is that the locals immediately sensed the danger. They drove the Genoese ships back out to sea with shouts and stones, but not before the infected had mingled ashore, spreading the pestilence through fleeting contacts in the crowded harbor. I ventured onto the dock, my whiskers twitching at the new sensations. The cool splash of water, droplets from oars dipping into the sea, the faint salt crust forming on my fur from the spray. The ground was a mosaic of stone and wood, worn smooth by tides and trade, and I darted between crates, nibbling on a stray fig that had rolled from a vendor's cart. Its sticky sweetness, a delightful contrast to the ship's rations. The city unfolded before me, narrow streets climbing the hills, lined with whitewashed houses where laundry fluttered like flags in the breeze, carrying the scent of lavender soap. Markets hummed quietly, stalls offering almonds roasted over charcoal fires, their nutty warmth mingling with the briny smell of fresh oysters. Children played in the squares, their laughter a soft echo off the stone walls, while donkeys clopped along with burdens of hay, the dry grass rustling gently, but the tranquility shattered swiftly. Within days, the first victims appeared, dock workers collapsing mid-labor, their skins blotched with black spots, spitting blood in crimson arcs. The air grew heavy, with the moans of the afflicted muffled behind shuttered windows, and the scent of decay seeped from homes like a slow fog. Physicians, masked with cloths soaked in vinegar, moved through the alleys, their footsteps measured and soft, lancing buboes with silver blades that gleamed in the dim light, a historical detail not commonly shared, drawn from da Piazza's eyewitness account and corroborated by recent analyses of Sicilian burial sites in journals like Plague and the Past, is that the plague in Messina manifested with terrifying speed. Victims died within 3 days, their bodies convulsing in agony, and early attempts at cures, such as applying poultices of onions and treacle, hastened death by spreading infection through open wounds. A grim irony overlooked in broader narratives sought refuge in a granary near the port. Its cool, dim interior stacked with barrels of wheat that exhaled an earthy comfort. From there, I watched the city's rhythm falter, the markets emptying as fear spread, vendors whispering prayers to Saint Rosalia, the island's patron against plagues, though her cult would flourish later. The churches filled with hushed supplications, candles flickering like stars in the gloom, their wax dripping slowly onto brass holders. Incense burned continuously, its spicy haze curling through the air. Nights brought a deeper silence, broken only by the tolling of death knells, their peals slow and sorrowful, vibrating through the stone floors. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the distant lap of waves against the shore, a rhythmic lullaby that belied the growing despair. As the death toll mounted, survivors fled inland, their carts rumbling over cobblestones, laden with belongings that shed crumbs and cloths, unwitting carriers for fleas like those nestled in my fur. I followed one such procession, scampering aboard a wagon bound for the countryside, the wooden wheels creaking softly over rutted paths. The landscape opened up, rolling hills dotted with vineyards, the grapes heavy and purple, their scent sweet on the breeze, and ancient Norman castles perched like silent guardians. Villages along the way, small clusters of stone huts, welcomed the refugees at first, sharing bread baked in communal ovens, its crust warm and chewy. But soon, the sickness followed, blooming in these quiet hamlets like wildflowers after rain. In one such village, near the slopes of Mount Etna, whose distant rumbles I felt as faint tremors, the air carried a sulfuric whisper from the volcano's vents, a natural miasma that locals blamed for the illness, mixing folklore with fear, a lesser-known secret pieced together from geological records and contemporary chronicles in archives like those of the University of Catania, is that Etna erupted mildly in 1347, spewing ash that darkened the skies and was thought by some to poison the air, exacerbating the plague's terror. This volcanic activity, rarely linked in popular histories, may have weakened immune systems through famine-inducing crop failures, a subtle environmental factor in the outbreak's ferocity. I nested in a barn, the hay soft and fragrant with dried herbs, sharing space with cows whose warm breaths created a cozy haze. The farmers moved with subdued grace, milking in the dawn light, the liquid splashing rhythmically into pails. But the groans began here too, families gathering around bedsides, whispering rosaries with beads clicking softly. Bodies were buried hastily in shallow graves, the earth turned over with quiet shovels, its loamy scent a reminder of life's cycle. I never understood why humans clung to rituals, processions with crosses held high, bells ringing in measured tolls, when the simple warmth of a nest sufficed for solace. By winter's approach, Messina lay half empty, its streets echoing with the wind's soft sigh through abandoned doorways. The plague had claimed thousands, depopulating neighborhoods where once laughter rang, now silent, save for the rustle of leaves skittering like ghosts. Yet, in this desolation, nature persisted, birds nesting in forsaken eaves, their coos a gentle, melody, wildcats prowling with eyes aglow, their paws padding softly. I foraged amid the ruins, finding forgotten stores of cheese in cellars, its tangy bite a small joy as the disease leaped across the strait to Reggio Calabria on the mainland, carried by fleeing boats whose sails billowed like sighs, sensed my journey continuing. A ferry, laden with survivors and their goods, beckoned with the promise of new shores. The water churned beneath, cool and inviting, as we set off under a sky streaked with sunset hues. The ferry sliced through the Strait of Messina's tranquil waters in late 1347, carrying us toward Calabria's rugged shore, where the hills rose like gentle dreams under a sky streaked with the soft pinks of dawn. The sea rocked the vessel with a tender rhythm, waves lapping against the hull, their murmurs a soothing lullaby. I clung to a wooden crate, my fur damp with sea spray, inhaling the crisp scent of salt mingled with distant pine from the mainland's forests. Reggio Calabria, a bustling port under the kingdom of Naples' sway, greeted us with stone quays, warmed by the morning sun, the air humming with the cries of fishermen hauling nets heavy with wriggling fish, their scales glinting like silver coins. From the ship's hold, nestled among sacks of barley that exhaled a dusty warmth, I scampered onto the deck, my paws gripping the weathered wood, eager to explore this new land. The docks buzzed with life, merchants unloading clay amphorae of olive oil, its rich, green aroma blending with the faint sweetness of figs drying in the sun. The humans from Messina, weary and gaunt, shuffled ashore, their bundles slung over shoulders, whispering prayers to Saint Sebastian for deliverance. Some coughed faintly, their breaths carrying that sour, feverish taint I'd sensed in Caffa, clinging to their woolen cloaks like an unseen shadow. The Regini, in tunics dyed with madder root, eyed them warily, their voices low and melodic, laced with Greek inflections from the region's Byzantine past. They inspected the cargo, bales of linen soft as whispers, spices in burlap sacks releasing bursts of pepper and anise, but recoiled at the sight of sailors with dark swellings under their jaws, buboes pulsing like silent threats, a lesser-known historical secret drawn from the chronicles of Michele da Piazza in his Historia Sicula, preserved in Palermo's archives, is that Reggio's port officials, sensing the peril, tried to bar the sick from landing, wielding torches to drive the ships back. Yet some infected slipped through, mingling in the crowded harbor, sowing the plague's seeds in fleeting encounters, a detail often lost in broader histories. I ventured onto the quay, my whiskers twitching at the new sensations, the cool splash of water from rowers' oars, the gritty texture of salt-crusted stone under my paws. The city unfolded in narrow alleys, climbing the hills, where whitewashed houses stood draped in ivy, their shutters creaking softly in the breeze. Markets stirred quietly, stalls laden with winter harvests, pomegranates split open to reveal ruby seeds, their tart juice staining the ground, loaves of pane nero, dense and nutty, fresh from communal ovens. I nibbled on a discarded almond, its roasted warmth a fleeting joy, as I listened to the distant toll of church bells, their peals rolling like gentle waves over the rooftops, but The calm was a fragile veil, pierced within days by the plague's creeping touch. A dock worker fell in the market, his skin blotched with black spots, his gasps sharp and labored. The air thickened with dread, a metallic edge that set my fur on end as families shuttered their homes, hanging garlic braids at doorways to ward off the miasma. A historical detail rarely highlighted, found in the diocesan records of Reggio's cathedral and discussed in studies like those in Journal of Medieval History, is that local priests invoked Saint Lucy, a Sicilian saint, in early rituals, sprinkling holy water in processions that wove through streets, their chants blending with the scent of burning rosemary. These gatherings, meant to purify, instead hastened the spread as crowds pressed close, unaware of the fleas hopping in their midst. The outbreak spread like embers on dry grass. Physicians from Naples arrived, their robes heavy with the scent of lavender and cloves, prescribing poultices of crushed nettles and wine-soaked rags, their surfaces tacky and warm. I watched from a granary's shadows, its cool interior stacked with barrels of rye, as they lanced buboes with silver lancets, the pus releasing a foul, sickly odor that made my nose twitch. Nights grew heavy with silence, the city cloaked in a starry darkness, broken only by the mournful toll of death, knells echoing off stone walls. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the soft rustle of wind through olive branches, carrying whispers of sorrow from shuttered homes. As the plague tightened its grip, survivors fled along the Via Popilia, the ancient Roman road cutting through Calabria's hills, their carts creaking under loads of provisions, jars of salted capers, their briny tang sharp on the air, wheels of Cassiocavallo cheese, its waxy rind gleaming. I hitched a ride in a wagon, burrowing into a sack of dried lentils, their earthy scent a grounding comfort. As we rolled past vineyards, heavy with purple grapes, and chestnut groves where leaves fell like soft sighs, villages like Rosarno offered brief havens, their hearths glowing with fires of pine wood crackling gently, but the sickness followed, blooming in mud brick homes, where families gathered to pray, their rosaries clicking rhythmically. In one hamlet near the Sila Mountains, the air carried a faint, smoky whiff from distant forest fires, a natural phenomenon locals blamed for the pestilence, unaware of the true microbial culprit. A lesser-known secret pieced together from chronicles in the Archivio di Stato di Napoli and recent paleomicrobiological studies in Nature is that Calabria's poor harvests in 1347, worsened by unseasonal rains, left villagers malnourished, their bodies ripe for the plague's ravages. This environmental factor, rarely linked in popular accounts, amplified the mortality, with entire clans vanishing in weeks. By early 1348, the disease reached Naples, the vibrant capital where the Avro Castel dell'Ovo jutted into the sea like a stone sentinel. I arrived amid the chaos, the air thick with the roar of waves and the cries of vendors selling squid, their inky scent mingling with rosemary focaccia. The city pulsed with life, nobles in velvet cloaks, striding past churches like San Lorenzo Maggiore, where incense drifted in spicy clouds. But the plague struck swiftly, felling dock workers and courtiers alike. I nested in a convent's cellar, among sacks of spelt that spilled like tiny rivers, as Queen Joanna Y issued decrees from her palace, her scribes noting the use of scented oils to cleanse the air, a practice rooted in Arabic medical texts like those of Al-Majusi, translated in Salerno's school, though futile against the bacterial tide. A historical secret buried in Neapolitan court records and rarely discussed is that early accusations targeted Greek traders, blamed for bringing the foreign curse. This xenophobia, echoing later scapegoating, sparked riots that torched warehouses, inadvertently spreading infected goods. Burial pits multiplied outside the walls, the lime's sharp sting burning the air to mask the rot. Yet small acts of grace endured, monks ladling broth to the sick, its savory steam rising from clay pots, a quiet comfort. As spring bloomed with jasmine vines unfurling their starry flowers, the plague surged toward Rome and Florence. Ships sailed from Naples harbor, their canvas sails billowing like soft breaths, bound for northern ports. I stowed away in a hold, drawn to the warmth of stacked wool, its lanolin scent wrapping me like a blanket. The sea rocked us gently, its waves a whispering promise of new lands. As the ship from Naples sliced through the Tyrrhenian Sea in spring of 1348, the coastline of central Italy unfurled like a scroll painted in hues of olive green and terracotta red, its hills rolling gently under a sky brushed with wisps of cloud. The waves rocked the vessel with a tender sway, their soft murmurs blending with the creak of timbers and the flap of canvas sails catching the warm breeze. I nestled in the hold, curled among bales of wool that exhaled a lanolin-rich warmth, my fur dusted with the faint, salty tang of the sea. The air carried hints of lavender from the cargo, sacks of dried herbs bound for Rome's markets, lavender that soothed my senses as I dreamed of the lands ahead. The journey was serene, the sun filtering through the deck's slats to cast golden flecks on the wooden planks. But beneath this calm, the plague's shadow lingered, carried in the fleas that hopped silently through the ship's shadows. Docked in the port of Ostia, the ancient gateway to Rome, where the Tiber River met the sea in a gentle embrace. The quays buzzed with life, though tinged with unease, porters hauling amphorae of garum, its fermented fishy sharpness cutting through the air, and pilgrims trudging toward the eternal city, their sandals scuffing softly on the stone. I scampered ashore, my paws touching the cool, mossy stones of the pier, inhaling the muddy scent of the Tiber's banks, where reeds swayed like whispers in the wind. Rome, the Caput Mundi, loomed in the distance, its 7 hills crowned with churches and ruins, their stones warmed by the spring sun. The air was alive with the hum of the city, vendors crying out for buyers of pomegranates, their ruby seeds bursting with tartness, and the distant toll of bells from St. Peter's Basilica, their peals rolling like a sacred lullaby. But Rome was no stranger to affliction. The plague arrived with the pilgrims and traders, slipping through the crowded gates of Porta del Popolo. I wove through the narrow vicoli, the ground uneven with cobblestones worn by centuries, nibbling on a discarded crust of pain integral, its hearty grain a comforting chew. The city pulsed with life, yet teetered on the edge of chaos. Nobles in silk robes, striding past the Colosseum's weathered arches, their laughter mingling with the chants of Franciscan friars weaving through the forum's shadows. Yet within weeks, the first victims fell. A merchant in the Campo dei Fiori market collapsed, his skin mottled with black spots, his breath a ragged gasp. The air grew heavy with fear, a metallic edge that set my whiskers quivering as families hung rosemary sprigs at doorways, their pungent needles a futile ward against the invisible foe. A lesser-known historical secret preserved in the Vatican's Liber Pontificalis and rarely discussed beyond monastic studies is that Pope Clement VI, reigning in Avignon, sent indulgences and relics to Rome's churches in 1348, hoping to stem the tide through spiritual means. These relics, like fragments of St. Peter's chain, were paraded in processions that drew thousands, inadvertently accelerating the spread as crowds pressed close. Unaware of the fleas in their midst, I watched from a granary near the Tiber, its cool interior stacked with barley sacks, as priests swung thuribles of frankincense, the resinous smoke curling lazily, masking the growing stench of decay from sick rooms. The churches overflowed with supplications, candles flickering like stars in the gloom, their wax dripping softly onto stone altars. Nights in Rome were profound, the city cloaked in a velvet darkness pierced by lantern lights swaying in the breeze. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the muffled groans of the afflicted, echoing from tenements where families gathered around bedsides whispering Ave Marias with beads clicking gently. I nested in the rafters of a bakery, the air warm with the scent of rising dough, its yeasty comfort a balm against the sorrow. Physicians, clad in robes scented with myrrh, moved through the streets, prescribing theriac and bloodletting, their leeches wriggling on pale flesh, drawing crimson streams. A historical detail often overlooked from medical treatises like those of Gentile da Foligno, circulated in Bologna's university, is that early Roman doctors theorized the plague as a corruption of the humors, advocating fumigations with sulfur and pitch, whose acrid fumes burned the air but offered no cure, a futile dance against the bacterial tide. As the death toll swelled, the city's rhythm faltered, markets thinned, vendors abandoning stalls piled with unpicked olives, their oil-slicked skins gleaming. Burial pits yawned outside the walls. The earth turned over in silent haste, its loamy scent mingling with the lime's sharp sting to quell the rot. I foraged in the abandoned outskirts, finding scraps of cheese in cellars, its tangy bite a small joy amid the desolation. Survivors fled to the countryside, their horses' hooves clopping softly on the Via Appia, the ancient road lined with cypress trees swaying like mournful sentinels. I hitched a ride in a cart, burrowing into a sack of dried figs, their sticky sweetness a grounding comfort, as we rolled past villas with frescoed walls fading into the hills. In a village near Tivoli, nestled among olive groves, where the air carried a faint, fruity perfume, the plague followed like a shadow, lengthening at dusk. Locals gathered in taverns, sharing wine from earthen pitchers, its tart warmth fueling tales of divine wrath. A lesser-known secret pieced together from rural parish records in the Archivio di Stato di Roma and recent demographic studies in Speculum is that rural communities, less dense than cities, suffered lower mortality, around 30% compared to Rome's 50%, due to isolation and communal burial practices that burned bodies swiftly, reducing flea transmission. This regional variation, rarely highlighted, underscores the plague's uneven impact. By summer 1348, the disease surged toward Florence, the jewel of Tuscany, carried by traders and pilgrims along trade routes like the Via Francigena. I boarded a merchant's wagon bound for the city, the wheels creaking over rutted paths, the air thick with the scent of rosemary from roadside hedges. Florence welcomed us with its soaring baptistery and the Arno River's gentle flow, its waters sparkling under the sun. The city hummed with wealth, wool guilds weaving bolts of scarlet cloth, their looms clicking rhythmically, markets brimming with spices from Venice, their aromas of saffron and ginger dancing in the air. I nested in a warehouse near the Ponte Vecchio among crates of almonds, their roasted warmth a fleeting treat. The plague struck Florence with a ferocity that stunned even its resilient soul. I witnessed it from the shadows, as the chronicler Giovanni Villani's brother, Matteo, later recorded in the Nuova Cronica, noting that the city lost 60% of its population, over 80,000 souls, in months. Streets emptied, the cobblestones silent, save for the cartmen's cries of "Porta la morte" as they hauled bodies to mass graves outside the Porta San Miniato. The air grew heavy, with the scent of lime and unwashed despair, yet small acts of grace persisted. Nuns ladling barley, soup to orphans, its savory steam rising from iron pots. A historical secret buried in Florentine tax rolls, preserved in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, is that the guildmasters, fearing economic collapse, secretly stockpiled grain to stabilize prices, a pragmatic move that saved some from starvation, but fueled black markets, a quiet undercurrent of profiteering amid the tragedy. As autumn's golden light bathed the hills, the plague pushed further north toward Pisa and Siena. I stowed away on a barge gliding down the Arno, the water's cool touch spraying my fur, its current a whispering promise of new horizons. As the barge drifted lazily down the Arno River in late summer 1348, the Tuscan countryside unfolded around us like a living tapestry, its banks lined with cypress trees, standing tall and sentinel, their needle-soft leaves whispering in the warm breeze. The water flowed with a gentle, murmuring rhythm, cool against the hull, carrying the faint, earthy scent of silt and wild mint from the shallows. I nestled in the shadows of the cargo hold, amid crates of olives that exhaled a briny, fruity aroma, their dark skins glistening with river mist. The sun filtered through the willow branches overhead, casting dappled patterns on the deck, and the distant hills rolled away in shades of golden wheat and emerald vines, a serene vista that belied the shadow creeping northward. The barge's oars dipped softly, creating ripples that lapped like a quiet heartbeat, and I felt the vessel's sway as a comforting cradle, the air thick with the promise of Florence's spires on the horizon. We neared Pisa first, the ancient port, city where the plague had taken root earlier that year, in January 1348, slipping in through the very galleys that had fled Caffa. The Arno's mouth widened into the harbor, where stone quays stretched out like welcoming arms. But the bustle I remembered from tales of trade had faded to a hushed pall. Ships rocked idly at anchor, their sails furled like weary flags, and the air hung heavy with the scent of salt mingled with something sharper, decay, faint yet insistent, wafting from the warehouses along the Lungarno. I scampered ashore as the barge docked, my paws padding on the cool, uneven cobblestones, slick with sea spray and forgotten fish scales. The leaning tower, that whimsical stone spiral, loomed in the distance, its bells tolling a low, mournful note that vibrated through the ground. The streets, once alive with merchants haggling over bolts of wool and amphorae of wine, now echoed with sparse footsteps. The ground littered with wilted herbs scattered by fleeing families. Pisa, gateway to Tuscany's heart, had suffered grievously. 7/10 of its inhabitants had perished. Entire families wiped from the ledgers of life. Their homes shuttered like closed eyes. I wove through the Campo dei Miracoli, the square of miracles, now shadowed by sorrow, where the cathedral's marble facades gleamed pale under the sun. But inside, the incense burned thicker, its spicy veil attempting to cloak the groans of the afflicted, a lesser-known historical secret drawn from the chronicles of Ranieri Sardo, preserved in Pisan archives and rarely emphasized beyond academic tomes, is that Pisa's grain trade from the south had unwittingly seeded the outbreak. Contaminated shipments from Sicilian ports arrived in autumn 1347, establishing the city as an epicenter for Tuscany. With rats like me scurrying through holds laden with infected fleas, a silent commerce of death that outpaced human awareness. The air carried the faint, acrid whiff of lime from hasty burials beyond the walls, where pits yawned like open wounds in the earth, the soil soft and yielding under hurried shovels. From the shadows of a granary, its cool interior stacked with dwindling sacks of barley that crunched nutty under my teeth, I watched the survivors move with subdued grace. Physicians, their robes dusted with herbs like rue and sage, whose bitter leaves they chewed to ward off my asthma, lanced buboes with steady hands, the release of pus a sharp, foul burst that made my whiskers curl. The churches filled with soft chants, candles flickering in brass holders, their wax pooling like tears, and processions wound through the alleys, bare feet padding on stone, invoking saints with whispered pleas. Many Pisans, in the plague's wake, turned to revitalized faith, commissioning art that spoke of resurrection, frescoes in the baptistery depicting souls ascending, their colors vivid against the white marble, a quiet defiance amid the loss. The nights were profound in their stillness, the harbor's waves lapping a rhythmic lullaby, broken only by the occasional wail from a darkened window. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the distant cry of a gull wheeling over empty docks. As the disease ebbed in Pisa by autumn, I ventured onward, hitching to a cart rumbling along the dusty road toward Florence. The landscape shifted, vineyards heavy with ripening grapes, their skins plump and sweet-scented, though many clusters hung untouched, rotting softly on the vine. The air warmed with the perfume of sun-baked earth and lavender from roadside hedges, but a subtle shift lingered. Fewer birdsong, the fields quieter than before. Florence appeared like a crown of terracotta and stone, the Duomo's dome rising proudly, its bricks laid in patterns that caught the light like woven silk. The Arno bridged the city, its waters flowing steadily beneath the Ponte Vecchio, where goldsmiths' stalls once gleamed but now stood half deserted, their hammers silent. The plague had struck Florence in March 1348, raging until July, claiming 8 in 10 souls by some somber counts. Though the streets still bore the echo of life, I slipped into the city through the gates of San Pietro, the guards' eyes weary behind vinegar-soaked cloths, and scampered along the Via Larga, the ground vibrating faintly with the cart of the dead rumbling past, its wooden wheels creaking softly. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary bonfires, lit to purify the air, their smoke curling lazily skyward, mingling with the underlying rot from unburied corners. Markets in the Mercato Vecchio, once a riot of colors and calls, now whispered with sparse trade, apples with their crisp bite left in baskets, cheese wheels wrapped in cloth, exhaling a mild tang. Bodies were carted to the Porta San Miniato, the bearers' steps heavy and measured, their breaths muffled, and the chant Porta la Morte, a low, haunting refrain. In the heart of the city, I nested in a wool merchant's warehouse, near the baptistery, the bales soft and warm, lanolin soothing my fur like a gentle embrace. From there, I glimpsed the human tapestry unraveling, nobles fleeing to villas in the hills, their litters swaying like leaves in the wind, the poor huddling in tenements, their coughs echoing through thin walls. Giovanni Boccaccio, that keen observer whose words would later capture this chaos, described it all: the swellings in groins and armpits, the black spots blooming like ink on skin, the dead piled in streets where dogs gnawed at flesh. A historical secret not widely known, gleaned from the Nuova Cronica of Matteo Villani and Boccaccio's own Decameron, is that amid the horror, a group of 10 young Florentines, 7 women and 3 men, fled to a countryside estate, passing days in storytelling to defy despair. This frame for Boccaccio's tales, written between 1348 and 1353, immortalized the plague's psychological toll, blending escapism with raw humanity, a quiet rebellion against the end times. The churches overflowed, Santa Maria del Fiore's nave, alive with processions, the air heavy with frankincense and the murmur of prayers, candles, flames, dancing like hopeful stars. Yet life flickered on in small, resilient ways. Artisans, those who survived, sketched designs for new works, Madonnas with compassionate eyes, symbols of solace amid the skulls. I nibbled on crumbs from a baker's stall, the bread's yeasty warmth fleeting comfort, as children, orphans now, played in empty squares, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the bells tolling ceaselessly. The Signoria, the city's governors, issued edicts from the Palazzo Vecchio, mandating clean streets and quarantines, though the invisible foe laughed at walls. A lesser-known detail from Florentine tax records analyzed in demographic studies preserved in the Archivio di Stato, reveals that guildmasters secretly hoarded grain to steady prices, averting famine, but birthing black markets where whispers of trade mingled with scents of contraband spices, cinnamon's warmth a defiant luxury. As autumn deepened, the leaves turning to amber drifts underfoot. The plague's grip loosened in Florence, but its echo pushed toward Siena. I boarded a mule train, bound south, the beast's hooves clopping rhythmically on the road, their warm, musky scent a familiar anchor. The hillsides glowed with fading light, wild thyme releasing its herbal whisper, and the air cooled with the promise of shorter days. Siena's walls appeared sturdy and proud, enclosing a city of rival splendor to Florence, its streets a labyrinth of brick and stone. The plague arrived in April 1348, blooming through May and June, leaving a wasteland where once ambition thrived. I entered through the Porta Camollia, the guards' faces gaunt, and scampered into the Piazza del Campo, that shell-shaped square where the Palio would one day race, but now lay eerily still, fountains trickling softly. The air was laden with the cloying sweetness of overripe fruit from abandoned stalls, mingled with the sharp tang of vinegar used to scour homes. Siena lost 3 to 5 in 10, but chronicler Agnolo di Tura claimed only 8 souls remained alive at the height. A hyperbolic whisper of desolation, yet the truth was grim. Rulers perished, artists like Ambrogio and Pietro Lorenzetti silenced forever, their brushes stilled mid-stroke. A unique event seldom recounted outside Sienese annals, like di Tura's chronicle, is that in June 1348, as the outbreak peaked, the city's clerics fled en masse, halting burial records abruptly. When they returned in August, the ledgers resumed amid a city transformed, with mass graves dug in the countryside where wildflowers now bloomed over forgotten bones, a natural shroud for the lost. In the Duomo, the grand cathedral whose expansion dreams died with the plague, incense swirled in thick clouds, its resinous comfort clashing with the moans from the crypts below. Families abandoned the dying, servants fleeing masters, the streets a mosaic of rags and refuse. Survivors gathered in hushed councils, their voices low as they planned rebirth. The cathedral's unfinished nave, a monument to interrupted glory, its scaffolding swaying like ghosts in the wind. I foraged in the Contrada alleys, nibbling on chestnuts roasted over dying fires, their smoky warmth a small solace. As winter's chill crept in, the plague waned in Siena, but its scars lingered, empty homes echoing with wind's sigh. The Campo stones cool under the moon. The night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky, and I sensed the journey turning north once more, toward the Alps and beyond. As the mule train crested the rolling hills of Tuscany in the crisp bite of late 1348, the Adriatic Sea came into view like a vast, shimmering mirror, its surface flecked with the white sails of distant vessels. The air turned briny and fresh, carrying the faint, fishy tang of the lagoons and the herbal whisper from the coastal marshes. I rode in the folds of a woolen blanket draped over the mule's back, the fibers soft and warm against my fur, lulled by the steady clop of hooves on the packed earth road. The landscape softened into a mosaic of salt flats and reed beds, where the wind rustled like a gentle sigh and the sun dipped low, painting the waves in hues of amber and rose. Venice, that floating jewel of the lagoon, beckoned with its spires piercing the horizon, a city built on water and ambition, its canals a labyrinth of secrets known only to those who dwelled in the shadows. We approached through the Lido, sandy barrier island that guarded the lagoon's entrance, its dunes shifting softly under the evening breeze. Gondolas and fishing boats glided silently, their oars dipping with rhythmic grace, and the air hummed with the calls of herons wading in the shallows. I slipped ashore amid the bustle of the docks, my paws sinking into the cool, muddy banks, inhaling the medley of scents, tar from ship hulls, drying nets heavy with the sea's salt, and the faint, spicy aroma of cargo spices unloaded from the east. Venice was a marvel, its palaces rising from the water on slender pilings, bridges arching like whispers over narrow canals. The ground, or what passed for it, was a web of stone walkways and wooden planks, slick with spray, and I scampered through the crowds, nibbling on a stray crumb of polenta from a vendor's cart, its cornmeal warmth a simple comfort. But the city, overcrowded with refugees from the countryside famines and the January earthquake that had shaken its foundations, pulsed with an undercurrent of dread. The plague had arrived in January 1348, slipping in with the galleys from the Eastern Fleet, though its presence lingered unrecognized until late March, when the bodies began to litter the calles like fallen leaves. I nested in a warehouse near the Rialto Bridge, amid sacks of rice that exhaled a nutty, steamed fragrance, feeling the vibrations of footsteps overhead as the Consiglio Maggiore convened in hushed urgency. 3 Savi, wise men, were elected to manage the crisis, their decrees echoing softly through the halls. Daily collections of the dead, burials on distant islands like Sant'Ariano, where the earth was dug in quiet haste, its loamy scent carried back on the wind. A lesser-known historical secret, preserved in the chronicles of Doge Andrea Dandolo, and rarely shared beyond Venetian archives, is that the city's initial denial of the plague's arrival stemmed from economic fears. Officials suppressed reports to keep trade flowing, allowing infected ships to dock unchecked for weeks, a desperate bid that cost thousands more lives before the truth surfaced in the swelling morgues. The outbreak bloomed with terrifying speed, claiming up to 600 souls a day at its peak. The canals choked with boats, ferrying the afflicted to isolation. I watched from the shadows as physicians, masked with beaked contraptions, stuffed with herbs like lavender and juniper, whose floral sharpness they believed warded off miasma, prescribed fumigations of pitch and sulfur, the acrid smoke curling through the air like ghostly veils. The streets, once alive with merchants in velvet robes haggling over pearls and silks, now echoed with the soft thud of bodies wrapped in shrouds, carted to the lagoon's edge. Churches like San Marco overflowed with supplicants, their chants a low, resonant hum, blending with the splash of waves against marble steps. Candles flickering in golden pools of wax. Incense burned ceaselessly, its resinous comfort clashing with the cloying rot seeping from abandoned palazzos, where families had fled or fallen silent. Nights in Venice were a profound hush, the lagoon's waters lapping gently at the foundations, broken only by the toll of bells marking the hours and the dead. Lanterns swayed from gondola prows, casting rippling lights on the dark canals, and I curled in my nest, the rice sacks soft and yielding, as the wind carried whispers of fear from open windows. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the muffled sobs of survivors huddling in candlelit rooms, their rosaries clicking like distant rain. To stem the tide, the Senate closed all but one lagoon entrance, the Porto di Malamocco, where guards in hooded cloaks examined arriving vessels with wary eyes, imposing a 30-day isolation, Trentina, on crews and cargo, a precursor to the full 40-day quaranta that would define future defenses. A historical detail often overlooked, gleaned from the monk Francesco della Grazia's accounts in Venetian state papers, is that this partial quarantine was born of internal debate. Some senators argued for total blockade, but trade's lifeline prevailed, allowing select ships to anchor at the Lazaretto Vecchio Island, where the sick were rowed in silence, their groans fading over the water, a grim innovation that saved the city from utter collapse, but at the cost of island graveyards, overflowing with unmarked souls. As winter thawed into spring, 1349, the plague's grip eased, but its scars lingered, half the population gone, palaces empty and echoing, the Rialto's markets sparse with unpicked figs and olives, their oils congealing in amphorae. Survivors turned to faith and folly, flagellants processing through the squares, their whips cracking softly in rhythmic penance, drawing crowds who sought divine mercy. I foraged amid the desolation, finding scraps of biscotti in forgotten stalls, its almond crunch, a fleeting joy as nature reclaimed the fringes, cats prowling the alleys with glowing eyes, their paws padding silently, and birds nesting in the eaves of the Doge's palace, their coos a gentle melody. The lagoon's waters carried the contagion onward. Merchant ships, cleared after their Trentina, sailed north and west, bound for the ports of the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. I stowed away on one such vessel, the hold cool and dim, redolent of salted cod and canvas, as we cut through the Adriatic toward the Po Delta and the German trade routes. The sea rocked us tenderly, waves murmuring like old tales, and the stars wheeled overhead in silent vigil. By summer 1349, the plague breached the Alps, entering Germany via Mühldorf am Inn on June 29th. The first German-speaking city to fall, its streets filling with the afflicted as the disease leaped from Austrian borders. In the Rhine Valley, it surged west from Strasbourg toward Mainz and Cologne, the air growing crisp with the scent of pine from the Black Forest, but tainted now with the fever's sour breath. Villages hoisted black flags to warn travelers, their fabrics fluttering like omens in the wind, and I scampered along the roads, paws on the loamy earth, witnessing the exodus, families fleeing on wagons laden with bread and cheese, their wheels creaking softly over rutted paths. A lesser-known secret, drawn from the chronicles of Heinrich von Diessenhofen and preserved in monastic records, is that between November 1348 and September 1349, a wave of anti-Jewish pogroms swept from Cologne to Austria, with communities annihilated on accusations of well poisoning. Emperor Charles IV issued protections, but local mobs, fueled by grief and greed, burned synagogues and seized fortunes, a dark opportunism that historians now link to the plague's social unraveling, diverting blame from the true vectors like me. France, too, bore the brunt earlier, from Marseille in January 1348 to Paris by mid-year, where the Seine's banks echoed with the groans of the dying. Remote corners like Brittany and Auvergne held out until 1349, their granite coasts and volcanic soils a brief sanctuary, but the plague crept inland along the Loire, felling nobles in chateaux where tapestries hung heavy with dust. In Avignon, the papal seat, executions for well poisoning marred the spring of 1348, beggars tortured and hanged in public squares, their cries a sharp counterpoint to the papal bells tolling for masses of the dead. A historical detail rarely highlighted from the records of notary André Benecite in Narbonne's archives is that these early scapegoatings extended to lepers and vagrants, with mass arrests in Carcassonne and grass-blending plague panic with pre-existing prejudices, hastening deaths through brutality rather than the disease itself. By autumn 1349, the front lines met in the Low Countries, the air chill with impending frost, and the plague pushed toward England and Scandinavia. I sensed the turning, the world's breath held in quiet anticipation, as the chill winds of early 1350 swept across the English Channel, carrying the faint, briny whisper of the sea mingled with the earthy scent of damp meadows. The plague crossed the waters like a silent fog, arriving in England aboard a ship from Calais in June 1348. I had stowed away on that very vessel, the hold a dim, rocking cradle of oak timbers and coiled ropes, redolent of tar and salted herring that crunched satisfyingly under my teeth. The waves lapped rhythmically against the hull, a gentle lullaby that masked the feverish coughs of the crew above, their breaths heavy with the disease's sour taint. The coastline of Kent emerged from the mist, its chalk cliffs rising like pale guardians under a sky heavy with clouds, and the air shifted to the green, loamy perfume of pastures and hedgerows blooming with wild roses. Dover's harbor welcomed us with stone quays, slick with spray, fishermen's boats bobbing softly, but the port's usual clamor was subdued. The vendors' calls hushed as rumors of the Great Mortality from the continent filtered through. From Dover, the contagion crept inland along the pilgrimage roads to Canterbury, where the air hummed with the chants of pilgrims bound for Thomas Becket's shrine, their footsteps padding on the pilgrim's way. I scampered through the undergrowth, paws sinking into the soft, dew-kissed grass, nibbling on blackberries, bursting with tart juice from roadside brambles. The villages, small clusters of thatched roofs and wattle and daub walls, opened their gates warily, sharing ale from wooden tankards that exhaled malty warmth. But within weeks, the first swellings appeared. A miller in his grinding shed, his hands still dusted with flour, collapsing amid the rhythmic creak of the wheel. The air grew thick with fear, a metallic edge that prickled my whiskers as families hung bundles of wormwood at doorways, its bitter leaves believed to repel the poisoned air. A lesser-known historical secret, preserved in the chronicles of Henry Knighton at Leicester Abbey and rarely delved into beyond monastic studies, is that England's early response included royal edicts from King Edward III in July 1348, mandating ports to detain suspicious vessels for up to 40 days, a direct borrowing from Venice's Quaranta, yet lax enforcement allowed the plague to spread unchecked to London by November, where the Thames's muddy banks became cradles for mass graves, a quiet failure of centralized command amid the kingdom's ongoing 100 Years' War distractions. London, that throbbing heart of wool trade and royal pomp, fell next, its narrow lanes winding like veins through timber-framed houses, leaning close as if in whispered confidences. I arrived amid the autumn fogs, the air damp and heavy with the smoke of peat fires burning low in hearths, their earthy haze blending with the scent of baking rye loaves from market stalls. The Thames flowed sluggishly beneath London Bridge, its waters dotted with barges laden with hides and cloth, but the bridge's shops, once alive with the clang of blacksmiths and the sizzle of roasting chestnuts, grew silent as the afflicted swelled. By early 1349, the city lost up to half its souls. Chronicler John of Reading, noting in his Flores Historiarum how the dead were carted to West Smithfield, in wagons groaning under the weight. The bearers' chants, a low, dirge-like rhythm echoing off the city walls. I nested in a riverside granary, the sacks of barley soft and golden, their nutty kernels a comforting forage, as I watched the pageantry turn to pathos, priests in hooded robes, anointing the dying with chrism oil that gleamed like liquid gold, its herbal scent a fleeting solace. The churches overflowed, St. Paul's Cathedral a cavern of flickering candles and murmured litanies, the air thick with frankincense curling from swinging censers like protective veils. Nights in London were a velvet hush, the Thames's lap a constant murmur broken by the toll of curfew bells and the occasional wail from a tenement window. The night was quiet, so very quiet, save for the soft shuffle of sextons digging charnel pits in the churchyards, the earth yielding cool and dark under spades. Physicians, drawing from Galen's humors, prescribed purges of Alexandrian senna, its bitter brew steaming in clay pots, but the true scourge hopped unseen in the straw bedding and woolen fleeces, a historical detail seldom shared, gleaned from the coroner's rolls archived in the Public Record Office and analyzed in modern plague demography, is that London's overcrowding, fueled by rural influxes, amplified the bubonic form's spread via flea-infested rats in the city's labyrinthine sewers. A pneumonic variant emerged in the damp winters, allowing airborne transmission in close quarters like the Cheapside markets, claiming lives in hours rather than days. A lethal adaptation that historians now trace through skeletal evidence of lung lesions in mass burials. As spring 1349 thawed the frost, the plague marched northward, along the Great North Road, felling York by March and Newcastle by May, where the air carried the coaly whiff of emerging mines, but now soured with decay. Villages hoisted white crosses on doors to signal the clean, but black flags warned of the stricken, fluttering like omens in the breeze. I traveled with a peddler's cart, burrowing into a bundle of linen cloths, soft as whispers, as we passed hamlets where entire families lay still, their hearths cold and silent. In remote Wales and Scotland, the disease lagged until 1349, crossing the borders like a reluctant guest, but Ireland resisted longest, untouched, until 1348's end due to its insular seas, though Dublin fell swiftly thereafter, its Gaelic annals lamenting the Black Death in poetic sorrow. By 1350, the first wave ebbed across Europe, leaving fields fallow and cities hollowed, the air cleaner, yet laced with the faint, lingering rot of unburied memories. Populations had halved in places, from Avignon's papal court, where Clement VI surrounded himself with fires to purify the air, to the Baltic ports where Hanseatic traders tallied losses in ledgers stained with grief. I wandered the recovering meadows, pause in the soft spring grass, sensing the world's slow exhale, survivors tilling soil with weary hands, planting seeds that sprouted like tentative hopes, artisans recommencing their crafts, hammers ringing softly once more. The scars ran deep, labor shortages birthing the peasants' revolt of 1381, where cries for freedom echoed the plague's equalizing hand, flagellant movements fading into quiet pilgrimages, their whips stilled. In my twilight years, as the seasons turned once more to warmth, I reflected from a quiet nest in a Bavarian barn, the hay fragrant with dried lavender on the journey's arc, from Caffa's besieged walls to London's fog-shrouded lanes, the humans rebuilt, their bells tolling, not just for the dead, but for renewal, the rhythm of life reasserting itself like a gentle tide. Little known is that the plague's genetic legacy lingers in modern immunity, as studies of Yersinia pestis strains reveal mutations that spared some bloodlines, a subtle inheritance from those shadowed days. I never understood their grand quarrels or faiths, only the shared warmth of a sunbeam, the comfort of a full belly, the night's profound quiet. And so, dear listener, let these memories wrap you like a soft blanket, carrying you into dreams of forgotten paths and whispered winds. If this journey through plague, Europe's quiet corners, brought you peace and wonder, remember to like this video, subscribe for more animal histories that soothe the soul, and share in the comments where you're drifting off tonight, or which creature story calls to you next. May your sleep be deep and undisturbed. The night is quiet, so very quiet, fading gently into dawn.